Good evening. I'm Gloria, and this is Inception live chat show on Friday night. I've got my days right. Um, we're not in sync with our hours, but that's okay because we like to be different and spontaneous. So, welcome to Inception live chat show. I have a very special guest this evening, all the way from America. Um, and I'm going to have his name of his show is My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and I can resonate with that, and I'm sure many of us can. And he's Mark Steves. Mark Steves, welcome to Inception Live Chat.
Thank you so much for having me, Gloria. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm primed and ready to go. I mean,
You're
people, like
primed
you
and
said,
ready.
we started off of the hourly mark, but that's okay because you warmed me up in the median point there.
um, it's just life, shit happens, and we just go. If you go with the flow, there's no problems, there's no issues. So don't resist, and it won't persist. And on that note, I heard you on Chris Matthews' show, The Forbidden Knowledge News, and I was blown away with the insight that you have. No pressure on you now to really go for it, but I really was, and I loved the conversation, and I loved your journey, your journey into podcasting, and I was wondering, would you share it with my audience this evening? How did you get into podcasting, Mark?
Thank you. Yeah. So it's a story that I probably have told, and I start at a different point in my life every time because as
Mm.
the moments move on and life goes on, I really start to realize more and more that what I'm doing now quite possibly could have been something that I was, I don't totally believe in ultimate destiny, but it was something that I quite possibly was destined to do because when I look back at my younger mind and where I was drawn to, what curiosity that was really like bubbling up inside me, it was really pushing me towards a certain set of things that I'm really identifying now in hindsight. Um, just the other day I was thinking about how baseball, I was kind of pushed to join the little league by my father, and the only thing I liked about baseball was the symbols. I only like I liked the name, the team names. I thought it was
Yeah.
neat that every city seemed to have, or at least every city that I thought existed
Mm.
at that point in my life had their own mascot and colors and all that. And I was drawn to, nature and animals. So I really just, gave up sports and I was more of like a wild child.
Yeah.
But why I bring that point up about being interested in the symbols of like, the different mascots and
Hmm.
team names and whatnot is because
Hmm.
I see now the esoteric side of that maybe I was recognizing from a young point without sort of
Hmm.
having the context as to why
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
sparking that interest. But all that is to say, I was a weird kid who definitely didn't, fit in. But I
Yeah.
had friends. I wasn't a total, antisocial person. I was very social.
Hmm.
But with that social nature came a pretty harsh realization that because I was different, as I got older, I was rejected more and more
Yeah.
by my peers, just for being what seemed to be myself. And
Yeah.
that pushed me into more of an introspective,
Hmm.
lifestyle. I started, watching TV a lot or playing video games a lot or reading books a lot. I'd have go through these phases and eventually these phases kind of culminated into me sort of really deeply caring about the world. And because of family ideology, I
Mm.
felt like I was maybe going down the opposite path to where I was going now.
Mm.
In hindsight, of course, but then it felt very patriotic, oh, I was going to, join the military
Yeah.
and sort
Yeah.
of, do something like that because I was interested in martial arts for the sake of like defending myself, but then I found
Mm.
this beautiful artistic side of martial arts that
Yeah.
connected me with my consciousness and connected me with the energy field of my body. That's when it
Hmm.
started to really dawn on me that the world didn't need my help in that way.
Yeah.
And I would help the world, but not by joining the system, you know,
Yeah.
not by
No, I'm with
joining.
you. Yeah.
So it was sort of an you know, an unexpected turn of events, but I ended up smoking marijuana, which I'm sure I will do at this point, some point in today's
It's fine.
conversation.
Smoke away. You're
But
you're you're in USA. I'm in the UK, so they can't arrest you here. So smoke away.
well, hello, folks over there at the Scotland Yard, if you are listening. But anyways, I had this very established ideology that was, like I said, somewhat patriotic, somewhat military seeming. You know, I was leaning in that direction because of the martial arts I was doing. And I also had this sort of economic imperative of like, well, I'm not really, yeah, I don't see myself going to college. I don't know if my parents could afford it. Maybe this would be the right decision. Well, as soon as I smoked weed, all of that went down the drain. That no part of me wanted to hold a gun or get out in the, you know, in that
Yeah.
scenario. So, you know, and that's not to say I'm against Second Amendment rights. I'm very proud to be an American and have those rights that protect us from maybe a more tyrannical government than we already have. But that's a whole nother conversation. So
Can I jump
go
in
ahead.
there? I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard from many people, obviously friends as well as guests on the show, about marijuana and how well, the only way I can describe it is how they described it to me. It's not for all. If you take it with the right intention, it sort of gives a conscious expansion. If you go in just for social, let's have fun, whatever, and then you get nothing. You get but the munchies. Yeah, we call it the munchies here. I don't know what it is in America. All they do is eat, eat, eat. Yeah, and sleep. Yeah, man, and they're gone. But the ones I've heard about, and it's inspired them. It's like they've gone somewhere and it's just switched something on. Did that happen to you?
Absolutely. And I said, you know, down the drain went my, you know, sort of prospects, but that's because those prospects of where my life was going were really detailed and educated by the society that cannabis helped me wake up from. So, you know, I say all that to kind of give you a maybe a visual of who I was at that age, kind of,
Yeah.
you know, wanting to do right, caring about the world, but not really knowing how to apply myself. And as you said, cannabis, you know, I used to call it like, you know, sort of we'll say wiping the slate clean, because like I kind of painted the picture there was a lot of ideologies that came from my grandfathers and my father that really was just, you know, their programming that they had carried on through their lifetime and passed on to me. So
I mean,
all of that went away.
Sorry, that's a good point to raise. I mean, it's come up a lot as well, is we don't realize that we don't even have our own beliefs. What we think is right, wrong, black, white, up or down, or truth or lie, is given to us by either parents or caregivers, society, education, governments, culture, on and on and on. And that is a point that has been raised a lot in many aspects recently. When we say people wake up, and you see the shit that's been going on, and you go, I can't believe I believe that. I can't believe. So, I mean, from not everyone goes through. I didn't go through marijuana. I was going to call it the herb then, because over here they call it the herb. It's a herb, or this medicine. However, there are other ways to deprogram yourself. Let's say that. But in your case, it was marijuana. And, I mean, I often think, slightly digressing here, even though I don't smoke marijuana, wouldn't it be fun if everyone smoked it? Would it just be, wouldn't it? I mean, you would just see this. I don't know, maybe it's just me being delusional now, but I've seen the benefits of it. I have to agree, but don't smoke it at home in the UK because it's illegal. Okay, that's my disclaimer. There
Well,
you go.
I'm not disagreeing with you because I think there is a sort of, in a broad stroke way, you could say that. But unfortunately, with legalization here, I have seen people who once used cannabis, or I'm sorry, once used alcohol for this
Mm.
purpose. They're now using cannabis for that purpose of just,
Yeah, yeah, I know it goes both
disengaging with
ways.
their stressful
Yeah,
life, which is
yeah, yeah.
fine. But at the same
Mm,
time, I think what happened to me could possibly happen to anybody who smokes. I'm not saying I'm a
mhm.
special individual, but I
No.
think,
Mhm,
you know, in those early days when friends were sort of, instigating, and I didn't
mm,
really know anybody to buy it from, it was a sort of social thing. But what I noticed,
mm,
I was like, this is much, after I had left hanging out with my friends, I had much more deep experience with herbs. So I started to smoke on my own. And that's when the books really took on a whole new life. These books that I had that,
mm,
for whatever reason, I was drawn to them. I really dove into them with a sort of intuition. I think cannabis really removed a lot of what was in the
mhm.
way of my own
Yeah.
intuition, and it didn't provide all of these answers. It really just
Mm,
like lit the way to show me where the right questions that I should be
mhm,
asking, at least at that point in my life. And since then, I've noticed, I don't want to say an ascension in the terms of like a spiritual ascension, but in a mental sort of way, I've ascended past where I previously was, and I've integrated the sort of way I saw the world into this new, more open-minded way of seeing the world, that the feminine aspects of cannabis opened up inside of my
mm.
sort of masculine mind. And
Yeah.
I didn't know that was really going on
No.
totally at that age, but in hindsight, sort of was revealed. Um, and I just
It's
trust my
amazing.
intuition deeply.
Yeah, it's amazing. I all say hindsight's a bitch. We all look back and go, yeah, yeah, and we can see it. But a point does come where you don't have the hindsight. You just know it there and then. That eventually hindsight disappears and you're just in it. And that's what sometimes we're not even aware. And this is where I want to go with you. I noticed in you when I watched your interview, um, you just in that space. And I got to use the word. So I'm going to say with the marijuana with you, it gave you an open mind, conscious expansion. So that means non-judgmental. And did you find you had like a quest or a pulling to learn with the books? Many people that smoke marijuana fall asleep or eat food, but in your case, it opened you up that you had a thirst for knowledge.
Well,
Did you find that's what was happening to you?
and I think, yeah, and this is where I was sort of getting at with the military thing, not to bring that into the conversation other
Mm,
than to say I was very motivated to help change the world, and
yeah,
that was sort of an uninformed decision
yeah,
or reaction to do that. And as I became more informed, thanks to cannabis sort of broadening
mm,
my horizons, that
mm,
will that's always existed inside of me to help and to change for
mm,
whatever reason. I don't know if it's my generation. I don't know if it's because I'm an indigo child or whatever it is.
mm,
There's been a sort of sense of like, the world is changing and I'm going to help change it for the better, however I can. I
yeah,
did many different things in my life that, like I said, now in hindsight, I'm kind of like, oh, well, that wasn't an informed way to approach this
mhm,
problem, and I think right now, what's really come to the forefront is the synchro mystic nature of
yeah,
all of it. And it
yeah,
definitely has to be from a non-judgmental place because,
mhm,
that's secondary. What's objective
mhm,
is sort of primary, and your awareness of what's
mhm,
objectively incoming at every moment that is the now. I think
yeah,
that, it's important to be able to step outside of that process and
yeah,
analyze your subjective position when you are interpreting those objective stimuli, whatever they are, whether it's something as mundane as traffic frustrating you, or whether it's something as,
Yeah.
complex as the symbolism in, marketing campaigns, or the symbolism in, the things we say to each other that have an effect on our lives. I think that's something that I've really tried to master, because I have been very sensitive my whole life. And, that's why I started, martial arts, because for whatever reason, I don't know if it was my own just foolish, braggadocious, I rubbed people the wrong way. I kind of was like a class clown, but I wasn't like the class clown that everybody loved. I sort of got a bad rep in middle school, and that gave me a sort of, and that's like, I guess in the UK, that would be like between the ages of like 8 and 12, whatever school grades you're in.
The junior
Right.
school.
So
Before
around
you go
then,
to secondary, yeah.
so around then was when I started getting into these like sort of, uh, more social situations, but that came with more confrontations. Just
Mhm,
for whatever reason, I was sort of confrontational, but never bad natured. I never had bad
mhm,
intentions for
mhm,
anybody.
mhm,
I was always sort of reactionary. I'd kind of get a bad temper and maybe,
mhm,
uh, you know, fight, right? And get
mhm.
my
Yeah.
butt kicked a bunch of times, my ass kicked,
Yeah.
which is what led me into martial arts, to sort of
Mhm,
create this boundary between me and the outside world, because I was very sensitive, and I also didn't
mhm.
like how others who weren't as sensitive as me would sort of treat me because of that. They treated me
Yeah,
like I
I
was,
hear you.
you
Yeah.
know, we could get into that. That'll sound like a sob story, but the point is, when I learned martial arts, I realized the psychological dynamics of what actually was going on in a confrontation, and
Yeah.
even down to like why certain people wanted to fight me. I realized, oh, they didn't
Yeah.
want to fight me because they actually enjoy fighting or the challenge of martial arts like I do, or at least like that's what kind of became
Mm.
after I got into it. I really enjoyed it. They didn't enjoy it. What they were doing was they were trying to create a situation where they could gain social power over me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that at a young age was huge, because then I started to realize how important the social psychological dynamics
Yeah.
were, and maybe even in a sort of like a antisocial way to a degree, because I really sort of dwelled on analyzing people to a fault, and it kind of
Mhm.
put me in a bad position, because I was very introspective, and kind of for a while I wasn't very good at interacting with people. At least I was very critical of myself. So maybe
Mhm.
where others wouldn't have noticed, I would have been like, oh yeah, that wasn't, a very good display of my personality. I should try again. And
Mm.
and all of this kind of really culminated into me kind of just being like, enough's enough. And that's when the undoing yourself, Alan
Yeah.
Watt, sort of Chris Hyatt, Robert Anton
Oh,
Wilson.
Alan Watts. Alan Watts. I mean, that man years ago blew me. He just blew me right open. Him, Alan Watts. I mean, obviously because he's British, English language. I understood everything he said in context. And I loved his approach. He was just so direct, so direct. It was easy. No airy fairy love and light crap that goes on in the world. He just said it as yes, and I do resonate with Alan Watts. I still listen to him to this day. Still
Well,
listen to him.
and I was in a sort of like I was I was trying to overcome the issues that were ego on a
Yeah,
societal level, or at least just my interactions with that
yeah,
element of society, and sort of resolved to trying acid and mushrooms and other things that might not be recommended by me or you, but
no,
people do them, and they have
yeah.
really great experiences.
Mm,
And I sort of, I don't know if it was then when I really sort of had a taste of what spirituality was.
Hmm.
But I really got away from the idea that I was gonna ever have any sort of control over what other people thought of me, and
Yeah.
that was an amazing sort of
It's
revelation.
it, that revelation. I say what other people think of me is none of my business.
Right.
But way back in the day when I was younger, you would have got face planted by me or something like that, or it would have been ah! But yeah, so that I think, when I hear that from other people as well, I know the importance of that. When you go through that process, like you were saying, how you were, and as you were growing up and the experiences, it was like, I always say now, it's like I was in school. I was learning how not to resist consequence, resist, and then you just let it go. You let it go. Um, and as I said, what other people think of me is none of my business. It does something to do with me.
Right.
It's their truth, not mine. So
Well, and
I
around
appreciate
this same time, and I feel like maybe this will get us into more of the conspiratorial stuff that really led me into the
it.
podcasting world, so I can fully answer your question.
You're doing
'Cause-
great. You're doing great. You're doing
so
great.
there were a lot of things in my mind that made me question other people, and
Mm,
with all that being said, I didn't want to feel superior to anybody. Like, I
mhm,
felt like that, like, it wasn't that I was just smarter than everybody, and that's why I was looking into this stuff that nobody
mhm.
else seemed to care about. I felt like, no, this has been like worked out of us. Like, people have been deceived to the point where they're not interested in this stuff anymore, and for
Yeah.
whatever reason I was drawn into the occult, esoteric,
Mm,
true,
mhm,
you know, because like I said, I come from a background of like learning about nature and science and
mhm,
really trying to get a full grasp of how the
mhm,
world works.
mhm.
So that's never left. I've just sort of ditched the model many times for the new
Yeah.
model and then
Yeah.
integrated everything into a synthesis that I think,
Yeah.
again, not something that I'm qualified to, you know, decide for everybody, but I can decide it for myself using my own intuition.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's kind of why I also thought it was important to clarify that it really didn't happen until I realized I would never control what anyone else thought. And that's
Yeah.
why, the podcast, and we'll maybe get to this in a little bit, has
Mm,
been so cool, because from that
mm,
place of confidence, I'm connecting with people on a level that I couldn't before when I
yeah.
was in my own way, because I
Yeah.
wanted to connect with people on that level my whole life, hence the name of my
Mm,
show. My family thinks I'm
mm,
cause but those
mm,
those folks, they know me too well. They know
yeah.
me for
Mm,
all my mistakes. So now they're not going to trust
mm.
me because I have all this knowledge,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh yeah,
I
sure."
know. Can I say pump the brakes there? I want to go back
Yeah.
to you went into the occult. Many of us have gone down a similar path. I always use the analogy about our human experience. And the analogy is, if I have an orange, cut it in half, give half to you, half to me. We have both experienced eating the orange. However, we will both experience it differently. And I'm using that analogy as a segue into, you touched upon the occult. I also went into the occult. And fell in love with like John Dee and all, and my God, I couldn't stop for a long period of time. And as I moved through, and then when I come out the other side, thinking, well, why did I just do that? And it again, hindsight's a bitch. Not until later on in this experience, and others have said it too, we had to go through this process. It's the same process we're all having, but slightly different angles on it. Did I found I even researched and studied Mr. Crowley, and I did not agree with the things he did at the end. That's my disclaimer. However, I was interested in the psychology of it all. That was really what was for me. That was my field, psychology, criminology, going down. So when you went into the occult aspect, how did that shift you? You know, like when you said, when you realized other people's opinion of you is none of your business. I found there was a big shift when I come out the other side of the occult itself. Did you find that too? I mean, some people stay in it, we know, but obviously we didn't. Did you find what was beneficial for you? What was your knowing, your learning coming through that era?
So this gets into some tricky stuff because you know, young hearts, everyone's been in that place when you're lonely and all you want is these feelings inside to be requited. You want people, someone to know you, someone to love you on that level. So that was a really huge motivation for me, as it is most young men, you know, to find love, and that was in a really kind of maybe dark way to most people what I was drawn to the occult for, because this idea of like love magic or a love spell that could maybe like, you know, turn my fate around or whatever was in my mind at that age. So that's where I kind of experimented, and it started with, you know, candles and spells, and it also started with someone who I've spoken about many times. You know, respectfully, I call him my mentor, even though he never asked me to call him anything but his, you know, first name, which is Amos. And, you know, Amos is a really interesting guy who I met through synchronicity, you know, and I didn't really even know what synchronicity was back then, but, you know, I mention him, A, because he meant so much to me and everything he taught me, but B, because one of the things that he taught me that really changed my direction was that if I burned sage, which is a herb, you could buy it at most, you know, new age shops. And at that time, I was aware of it, but I wasn't totally enveloped in that world. And he said, you know, burn sage and pray to the goddess of this sage plant. It's a feminine plant, you know. And he broke it down to me that all plants have a sort of consciousness that's like mythic, you know. It's not, you know, an individual consciousness, it's like a shared consciousness across that species of plant. And you know, he said, you know, you burn it and you pray to the sage and she'll bring you a lover. And I swear, like, candle magic and all that stuff did not work as fast as that. And it wasn't because, you know, he had some kind of voodoo and enchanted being, or he was practicing greater magic than the candle magic stuff. It was the direct connection between him and I, and that moment that made it so real, so much more real than, for whatever reason, buying candles from a new age shop and taking them home. As emotion, you know, there was a lot of emotion in both of those events, but the second one, it was different, and that made me really curious. And I played around with that stuff, and it didn't really end up well. You know, it got me some dates, it got me you know, interacting with a lot of women, but it never ended well. It ended quite bad in a lot of cases. And you know, I had one ex-girlfriend who, you know, basically like hated my guts, and I'll tell you, you know, between me, you, and everyone listening, I probably, you know, invited her into my life because of a spell I did, you know, and that definitely did not end well. So I say all that and warn people, you know, don't go down that road thinking that that's going to solve all your problems. It's going to teach you some hard lessons, which is maybe the solution you need. And it was the solution I needed, but it's never going to acquiesce your desires in the way you think it will.
I agree. Can I just touch on that?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, hindsight's a bitch as well. I never did the love potions. I was aware of them. I used to want to do the magic and Enochian magic. I was into Enochian magic, especially because obviously when I was born seeing dead people, so what you call a medium, so I could all see dead people and all things like that, and spirits and whatever. And I wanted to connect to the angels, but as I said, the orange, we've had similar experiences, but it's different. I found from them experiences what we will be, this is my truth, you don't have to agree, but what we were going through when we were going through or doing our spells, and we were starting to touch upon what we know now, that everything is vibration, words are vibration, every action you do, and when we speak, it is a spell. And there's always a consequence of fucking action. And so that's where I'm at now. That's my truth now. So when I hear people tell me they've gone down similar to me, but different, as I said, and I'm going, oh my God, it's great. I wasn't the only one that went down that road, but it taught me the power of intention. And when we were younger, getting involved in, I was doing the Enochian and numerology with it, and John Dee, and I was just having a great time, and it was just, I loved it. I couldn't get enough. I didn't realize the consequences at the time, but now I do. It was like a training. How does that resonate with you?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's what leads me to tell people when I've been prompted in similar ways that there is a sort of invisible school of learning that you can interact with. And it's sort of in this, neat, fun code breaker kind of way where, whether it's through doing a spell or whatever it is that initiates you into this, you start to interact with something and play with this game that is maybe your higher self in another higher dimension, or maybe it's, you in the future, or who knows, the proper explanation for how the metaphysics function. But I think it's something totally subjective, and that's again why I kind of talked about separating the objective from the subjective, because it's through that you can really start to understand why your consciousness is so special, and how you're not just an objective thing in an objective universe. You're really having a very personal experience, and everyone's life is like a novel that's being written, as you said, through their own speech and spelling and creating spells. But I would say that for folks who get tickled by that and they say, oh wow, that sounds exciting, I want to do that, trust your intuition and really try to, and I'm not the expert on how, but really try to hone in on your intuition, and that will guide you to a podcast like this. So I imagine folks listening already have a sort of sense of it. But if you're new, go to a used bookstore, or even like, with the podcast, flip around a few podcasts and see what names resonate with you, what subjects resonate with you, because your awareness is going to pick up on things that will then, educate moments in a precognitive kind of way that you'll have in the future. And for me, that was buying a Sitting Bull t-shirt from a kiosk at a mall that eventually I wore while smoking a joint. And Amos, saw that shirt and said, this white boy is not an average white boy. He knows about the Native Americans to some degree. Let me try to school him or suss him out. And that led to, a 3 or 4 year, what I call mentorship, where he taught me about some really deep esoteric stuff. And it's funny, I was in community college at that time, and I had a really strong interest in anthropology because I wanted to study stuff like what I was reading in Carlos Castaneda's books. And I obviously, it was a little bit foolish because I was going to a community college, and that kind of work is done from like Ivy League institutions and state universities, and you get money and grants and all this stuff. And I just was not on the trajectory to accomplish any of that. So it was, didn't really make sense to study anthropology with a liberal arts degree, right? So I eventually dropped out, but that anthropology class was really important to me. And there was a secret society lesson that we had one day. It was like the third week into school, and he taught us about secret societies, this teacher. And I mean, most of the class they just seemed like they had no interest whatsoever in the class in general, most of my peers. But I was really, interested in this. And I had a book at the time called The Secret History of the World by a
Mhm.
gentleman from your country, Mark Booth. And that book talks a lot about secret societies and their influence on history. And I thought, wow, like here's an actual
Mhm.
history of the world, because for my whole life I had gotten this materialistic or really,
Mhm.
really religious version of history. And for the first time, my intuition was like, ding, 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 you
Yeah.
found it. Here's the way to kind of get your
Mhm.
bearings on where you are in
Mhm.
history and what's coming next. And so that book was important. And then obviously Amos, meeting him, why the secret society thought dawned on me and why I should connect those dots is because Amos only came to New Haven from Arizona, hours and hours, miles and miles away, all the way on the other side of the United States. He came to New Haven because in the 1800s, a man named Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George Bush, the
Mhm.
recent, the father
Mhm.
of the first George Bush, H.W.
Mhm.
Bush, he stole Geronimo, a legendary Native American, stole his femur and skull from his grave and brought it to this tomb on a
Mhm.
college campus miles and miles
Mhm.
away.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
great crime that people might read about when they get into this conspiracy
Mhm.
knowledge. It was probably more popular when the Bushes were in office. Now
Mhm.
I feel like I'm the only one who talks about it, but I think that was the mission that Amos was on, to on an esoteric level
Yeah.
redeem Geronimo's soul. And why I say esoteric is because my first instinct as a young 19-year-old guy was like, hey, man, let's just break in there and get the skull and bones back and bring them back. And he's like, come on, bro. You think I haven't already thought of that? He's like,
Yeah.
if I wanted to, because Amos, I
Mhm.
mean, he was an interesting character. He was homeless at the time, and he had pretty much, every homeless person in New Haven figured out. He knew them all, and he kind of
Mhm.
had a group of we'll say homeless folks that he kind of rolled with, and I don't want to say he was like they were his gang or whatever, but that's what it felt
Mhm.
like. So he
Yeah.
definitely had a group of people that could have pulled off that shoddy operation. He wasn't like that. He's a very deep guy, and he wasn't homeless for many, much longer than I knew him. He had a house, around the time that him and
Mhm.
I, sort of lost contact with each other. Um, but yeah, he didn't need to break in and steal the skull and bones, because the point was he was there, and every noon, every day of the week, he would go and stand in front of their secret society clubhouse, which they call the tomb, and he
Mhm.
would scream Geronimo's name, and with such power that it
Mhm.
really, I mean, it sent a shiver and a shrill, like
Mhm.
down your spine, it was
Yeah.
just so powerful. So that was something that really stuck with me, and I've embraced that message and that mission that he was on. And I try to carry it into the podcast. And at that age, I wasn't even aware of podcasts. I just, like I said, I was reading books and stuff,
Mhm.
and kind of maybe poking around on the internet. And there was a lot more to see on the internet back then.
Mhm.
But eventually, I found the Joseph Campbell lecture
Yeah.
series on
Mhm.
Spotify when they
Yeah.
were still playing it there, and that really got me into that sort of format of, listening to somebody talk about all these ideas. And then I, downloaded another app that had a bunch of podcasts on it, and that's how
Mhm.
I found Joe Rogan and everyone else, and
Mhm.
eventually Sam Tripoli, which synchronistically I now work for Sam Tripoli, which, you have a whole different audience, which is cool. I don't know, maybe they don't listen to Tinfoil Hat, but it's a pretty big show in the States. And for
Mhm.
me, I found this show and I'm like, wow, this is really neat. They're talking about all of these things,
Mhm.
and some things that I've never seen on the internet at that point in my life. And it
Mhm.
was all very charged up because it was like 2015. So we were about to have that big election with Clinton and
Yeah.
Trump. So everything was kind of in the air. and I was a delivery guy. So I would, go on these delivery routes and just listen to podcasts. And
Mhm.
I eventually found deeper podcasts like the Higher Side Chats and Grimerica Show. And it always kind of stuck with me, like, Sam's show is great, but he doesn't go into some of the topics that I really love. And
Mhm.
that never stopped me from supporting him, because I always felt this connection to, like, his message and who he was and how honest
Mhm.
he was
Mhm.
about sharing this message. And it's just so strange because I supported his show and the Grimerica show, and in a really karmic kind of way, working, kind of a minimum wage job. I couldn't really afford to spend $30 a month on podcasts, but I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
No, this is worth it. I'm
Yeah.
gonna support these guys, even if their Patreon content isn't great. I'm gonna support them
Yeah.
because their shows are great, and I'm gonna, help change the world by doing this, by supporting and keeping this content
Mhm.
on the airwaves. And it's just so, like, magical now thinking back, like, wow, I would, like, talk to the podcast and be like, "No, Sam, if you only knew this." And now I can, ring Sam up and be like, "Hey, Sam, did you
Yeah.
know?" So for me,
Exactly, yeah.
it's
That's magic.
yeah.
That's alchemy. That's alchemy. That's magic. That's I mean, before we go into, because I know where this is going and it's really interesting. I want to touch upon again about, how we speak and we create. You were going out and you were spending your money that maybe you couldn't afford, and you're talking just to the podcast. No, no, your intention was in there. And so that's how that's my truth, guys. That's how the magic of who we are works. When a heartfelt intention goes out and you focus, look what happens. Now you can phone the guy up. You don't have to talk to a podcast while he's going. And
Well, and
you're
it's
just,
it's so much more than that, because you asked me, how did my podcast get started? And that's really how it happened, because, Sam gave me an opportunity to be on his paywall show, his Patreon show many times. It was probably 3 or 4 times,
yeah,
and I hadn't done much with the show I had. It was sort of a YouTube show with, 3
yeah,
or 4 episodes. I didn't even know what a podcast host was. I didn't know I could, like, sign
yeah,
up with Spreaker or Transistor or
yeah, yeah.
whoever and put this
Mm,
stuff out there. But Sam was like, "Hey, I'm gonna start this spiritual podcast. I want you to be on it." And I'm like, "Awesome, I'll do it." I ended up being the fourth guest, but it was episode 3, magical
yeah,
number there, very interesting. Um,
yeah.
and then and then after the episode, he was like, "Hey, man, this show's new. Who do you think I should have on? I'm not sure who I should have on. You seem like you know more about this world than I do." So I sent him a list. I sent him like a 3-page list of people. I'm like, "Sam, you got to have this person." And I was like, "Oh, and for tinfoil hat, you should have this person."
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was kind of like a resume I was sending him in a way. And he was like, "You know what? I'm going to pay you to do this for me." And it was kind of like a conversation that he had with me that was like, "If you're going to start working for me, this could be a good opportunity for you. So you should start your own show." And that's
Mhm.
when, with all this excitement, I told my family, I'm like, "Hey, I'm going to be working for this guy, Sam
Oh,
Tripoli. He's a comedian. He lives in Los Angeles." And they're just like, "What?" You know, like, that's not that doesn't sound like it's going to get you anywhere. They were worried that I, wasn't
yeah,
doing deliveries anymore, because that seemed like a successful job for me. And that's when the name hit me. Oh, my family thinks I'm crazy. And it's
yeah,
always been true, but it really dawned on me at that moment in time. So the name of the show was born after that conversation with
yeah,
Sam. And I got one of my best friends on for the first episode, another best friend on for the second episode. Third episode, I had a guy from Ireland on, and we talked about Aleister Crowley, because,
yeah,
as many people remember, after I started working for Sam, he had me on Tinfoil Hat, and I talked about Aleister Crowley, which that's a whole
mhm.
rabbit hole we can go down if you'd like. But yeah, that was kind of where I was at, and it was very synchronistic how,
It's just beautiful.
that
It's
unfolded.
magic. Mark, it's magic. And that's what I say. It's magic. For me, it's evidential data to prove this shit works if you get it right. But you go through a schooling, like, if you know, it's a bit like Harry Potter. You do the spell wrong and you're going to suffer the ramifications of it. If you do it from the ego or to your status or whatever, but it's a learning curve. And then, but when you go in from heartfelt intention, which you obviously did, and I must say at a very young age, which is even more beautiful. I'm not that I'm too old, but you know what I mean. And look what happened. It was just pure magic. Who knew this was coming? You had created it, and you had planned it, and you had seeded it, but had a little bit of amnesia, just, and then boom, you're just there. And now all those that we idolized, we looked up to, we mentored. Now you're doing it. Now you're doing it. And I think that's why I like to share journeys on my shows, is to inspire anyone who watches this show, whether it's in 3 days, 2 days, 1 week, to inspire that if you pay attention to what you're going through now's the time, then you might catch it and not get it in hindsight. Well, you may maybe a little bit of hindsight, but you'll catch it. Go with your passion. And you went with your passion. And that's where you got. I think it's a beautiful story. And yes, you can talk about Crowley. Yes, you can. Yes,
Well, thank you. And you know, it is like simplified down to the finer points. And I think people listening, you know, if maybe it didn't inspire you, I'll say I left out a lot of failures. And I think that's important to recognize, is that we do fail and we cannot give up. And in a synchronistic sort of amnesiatic kind of way, it worked out for me. I don't know if that's in my chart, and you know, if someone could have divined that ahead of time, but I think what happened is something that I think you got out of me today, and I'll reiterate it. It's I had always been leading towards this place that I'm in now, and it required me going through all of these different zigs and zags and zigs and zags to get to this direction. You know, it's never, you know, a straight path, but I think it's worked out, you know, as curvy as it was. And there are a lot of like side plots that have developed too within that story. I mean, the time that I was sort of in between going on Sam's shows on his paywall before I worked for him, I drove down to Washington, D.C. after dropping a friend off in an airport in Virginia. And, you know, she lived in Egypt and was only kind of delayed as much as she was because of the whole, you know, nonsense that has gone on since 2020. And it was that summer when I brought her there, and because everything was so locked down and very empty, you know, Washington, D.C. was like a ghost town, and I was able to drive around on my own, just kind of seeing the sights. And it's about a 10-hour drive, 12-hour drive from where I live. So I'd never been there before. For folks who aren't from the States, it's pretty, you know, as close as it may seem, we're pretty far from each other. And there was magic around that obelisk. And I just kind of, I don't know how the physics of it works, but I imagine that if it's like a capacitor and there's this energy that's permeating out of it, and there are less people interacting with it, then you get a higher percentage of that energy because it's being dispersed amongst less points, right? So there was this really sort of interesting nature to being there at that time when the world was really you know, locked away and hidden away in their homes. The roads were great for someone who likes to drive. There's barely any traffic. Everybody was afraid, you know. I wasn't. And I stopped along the way home on the Susquehanna River because someone who I had really grown to appreciate was Michael Wan. His research really just jived and made sense. And I listened to his interviews many times and really tried to understand what he was talking about. And on my way home from Washington, D.C., I was listening to his show, and or not his show, but an interview that he had done
Mhm.
on the Susquehanna mystery itself. And I stopped along the way on the Susquehanna River and sort of said my piece. And I did it in a way that Amos had taught me, where, you
Mhm.
know, you take tobacco and you offer it to, the energy that
Mhm.
is, whether it's the spirit of the land, the spirit of the
Mhm.
river, a
Yeah.
mountain, an animal that you come across, whatever it is, you say a prayer and you give tobacco. And feathers also are a big part of this, and I touched on that with
Mhm.
Chris, I know a bit. So I always have feathers with me. They're in my car now, but
Mhm.
I brought a feather along with me for that journey because it was a particularly special one. So I'm standing there and connecting with the Susquehanna River, and again, like, I was just a listener. I wasn't a podcast
Mhm.
host. I didn't
Yeah.
know Michael at all. Um,
Mhm.
and I said my piece and I moved on, and then a couple months later, as my podcast was kind of up and running, and I was like, well, now I'm ready. I'm gonna have Michael Wan on. So I reached out to him. I got his number, or his email contact, through another podcast host. Shout out to the
Mhm.
Higher Side Chats. Greg's always been very kind to me, and his show
Mhm.
is amazing. So he's very generous with that. And he gave me Mike's email. I reached out, and we had a conversation that was very strange because Mike had his wand, a wand that he created
Mhm.
himself, I guess, next to him at his desk there, and he felt like it would work its way into the presentation. Well, funny enough, I had a wand that I had created 4 or 5 years ago, and it was within reach at the desk I was sitting at that time. So we're
Oh,
connecting, and we're like, "Hey, check this out!" And he's like, "Oh,
uh, I got one. I got to jump in there, Mark. I got a one. I've got terrible English for the UK. I have a one too that I created years ago with a medium friend. We went into the woods, special tree, special everything. I've got a one too.
Look at that."
Look at that. Anyway, I just had to share that. Not many people know that, guys, but now you do. Do go on. Do go on.
Well, and I always liked it because it is an air. It's associated with air,
Yeah.
and I think you and I have a sort of airy connection right now, and as do
Yeah.
Mike and I. So yes, I think that was very appropriate to interject with that. But it
Yeah.
was, that among many other things that kind of
Mm.
worked its way into Mike just being like, "Hey, if you're ever in the area, uh, give me a ring." He gave me his number and he invited me to stop by his house, which,
Mm.
as a sort of introspective person and, tendency towards shyness, I was a little
Yeah.
apprehensive, like, oh, yeah, sure. Like, if I'm ever driving in Pennsylvania, geez, it's not, the next state over, it's a couple states over. So
Yeah.
I didn't really think that I was ever going to meet him immediately. But then,
Mhm.
love had it. There was this girl that I was talking to that, came to see me. And then we drove back to where she was from, which was Indiana. Um,
Mhm.
so on this journey home, after spending some time with this girl I had met, who I'm no longer with, by the way, um,
Mhm.
she, you know, uh, lived in Indianapolis, which is on the 40th parallel, which is interesting. But on my way home,
Mhm.
met Michael Wan, and then a couple more times in between, and I even went out to visit him with my now girlfriend Tara, who is very much a part of this synchromistic journey for folks
I've
who've
got to
been.
say, I'm really jealous. I've had Michael on my show a few times on Inception, and you know I have the highest regard for him, and I'm really jealous now that you got to meet him. But hey, how I'll let you have that one.
Well, and it's interesting because, it's one thing to meet your idols, right? But Mike
Yeah.
and I met on a very, like, you know,
Mm.
mentor to
Yeah.
mentee level, the same way I met Amos. And
Hmm.
I've kind of held that respect for Mike, while also being his friend, and
Yeah.
kind of really appreciative of that.
Lovely.
But
Mm.
but yeah, it's interesting because now, as I mentioned before we got going here, some weird things have happened very, very recently. But in
Hmm.
between, seeing Mike in where he lives in Pennsylvania and like wintertime, him and I started a podcast together called Your
Hmm.
Handbook for the Apocalypse, where the goal would be to kind of connect the dots in our own life with things that we're also researching, but then
Yeah.
also just to be like, yeah, we're just going to talk and see what
Yeah.
happens,
Yeah.
But naturally, the way Mike and I are, there was a lot of synchromysticism that kind of
Hmm.
weaved its way through the show, and it kind of culminated into this off the grid choice where now Mike, I think, is has gone off the grid, and I don't know when he'll be back, when he'll be doing my show again.
Hmm.
um for folks who want more information on why he did that, I'd rather just refer them to his YouTube channel,
Hmm.
Susquehanna Alchemy.
Yeah.
And then there's an RSS feed by the same name where you can find our show that we do together called Your Handbook for the Apocalypse. But so I don't know what's going to happen next with Mike, quite honestly. Him and I have a lot in common, and as far as our research interests go, and if he isn't going to hold the torch of the Susquehanna mysteries, then if it is going to be passed on, I'm crossing my fingers that it gets passed on to me, and you'll
There
see
you go.
me dive in. But either way, what it's
Hmm.
really inspired me to do, and why I felt it's worthy of mentioning, especially after what you said about inspiring the audience, is
Hmm.
I've looked into the Connecticut River, which is a river that, gives its name to the state that I live in. Um,
Hmm.
and there's a couple of other really major rivers that go through this state. And obviously they don't compare to the Susquehanna. The Connecticut
Hmm.
is sort of close in length, but not
Hmm.
in age, I don't think. But
Hmm.
either way, it's interesting. Rivers definitely play a very deep, deep role in society and civilization and even in our consciousness. I think that's what Mike's
Hmm.
work reveals. So if I can do even sort of an inch of that for the Connecticut River, I'd be very proud of myself. But it's worth mentioning, since you're in the UK, that here
Hmm.
in Connecticut, um, it's a whole interesting history which does connect very much to the UK. I mean,
Does. Yeah.
the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is a book that comes to mind, but unrelated. The Thames River, which you guys call the River Thames, right? We
Mhm.
have a river in Connecticut that's called the Thames River, which is the same name. It's named after that
Mhm.
river. And in
Yeah.
the same way, Michael has identified the Susquehanna as being a sort of mirror to the Seine River, which goes through Paris. I'm
Yeah.
thinking what I'm going to approach next is where the synchromistic, information leads between
Yeah.
this connection between Connecticut's Thames River and the River Thames in
Wow.
England there, and
That'd be
see what,
great.
yeah, and see what, because I think there's a lot of really awesome folks like yourself who are aware of all this stuff in the
Mm.
UK. And I think, if anything, I can inspire someone on that side of the pond to take up that side of the research.
Oh yeah.
And I
Yeah.
know a lot of folks that are in the UK listen to the show. So shout out to all you folks. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Yeah. For those in the UK who are not fully aware of I can't say the word Susquehanna River, um, could you give a brief sort of like synopsis of it, a bit of its history? You don't have to go down the whole road, but why it is so important, and why Michael's been doing what he's doing, and you're doing what you're doing. What is it about that river?
So again, there are many things like you just said, and we don't need to spend all the time going into it
Yeah.
because it is all on Michael's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But for brief 101, the Susquehanna River is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, rivers in the world. Um,
Yeah.
it is what is also called the Chesapeake Bay. So for folks who don't know U.S. geography that well, the Susquehanna River starts all the way far north up in Cooperstown, New York. And
Mm-hmm.
it also has another branch that starts in western Pennsylvania, which is very mountainous and rural. And
Mm-hmm.
these two branches come down and form the lower part of the river, which then becomes the Chesapeake Bay in
Yeah.
Maryland. And the Chesapeake Bay is, very fertile estuary. It's got a,
Mm-hmm.
big culture of like crabs and all kinds of other shellfish. And
Mm-hmm.
where I'm
Mm-hmm.
from, it's kind of the same with oysters in the Long Island Sound, even though it's been polluted to shit thanks to New York City.
Yeah.
Um, but either way, the Susquehanna River is magical in a tutelary geomantic kind of way, and the founders
Okay.
of this nation not only knew that but planned for that. And I think, there's evidence of that with the first colony in America that was from Europe was Sweden. It was a Swedish colony, I think, and the Dutch obviously were up in New York, but I think the Swedes were the first to get in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And many interesting European groups followed. The Amish are very well known now. So the place,
Yeah.
even today, has this very strange appeal for
Mm-hmm.
someone interested in not only, just plain old spirituality, but
Mm-hmm.
the more hidden and esoteric forms of spirituality.
I
And
mean, you can. Would you say? I mean, when I think about it, like you spoke about the obelisk earlier on when you was out and no one's around, and the energy, and you just feel this. There are some places on Earth that have this pull, that have this energy, that have this whatever frequency, call it whatever you want, and you've got it obviously in India as well. And I think what in the UK we don't realise, I want to bring this in, we're just a small island in the UK. We have some little islands around us, but we're teeny weeny compared to the USA. So when Mark talks about it's a long way, it is humongous. 4 different time zones, by the way. So that's,
and
you've got to get a plane.
I only stay in the Eastern time zone for most of this story. I mean, yeah, I've been down to the mountains in Colorado,
Yeah,
but it's a hell of a way across the country. I mean, geez,
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't want to drive through Nebraska, folks. It's a lot of cow farms and they don't smell great.
No, we won't do a roadie through America. Definitely not. It's too big anyway. But I mean, as I said, this really brings it all back together. And I think what we call the occult and alchemy is to do with nature. Everything to do with nature, the magic of nature. So you've got the water, you've got the fire, the air, and the elements that go with it, and the spirits that go with it. Um, I need to ask you one more question. For myself, actually, I'd like to know if you could answer it for me. When your mentor stood outside the building and shouted out Geronimo all the time because they'd taken his skull and bones, why did the Masons do that?
So one thing to clarify, Skull and Bones, they might not identify as Masons.
Okay,
They do sort of have a lot of the same equipment or design symbology. Uh,
okay.
and they come from a time period when masonry was kind of thought to be politically distasteful. So it makes sense that they wouldn't want to be associated with Masons, at least at
Ah,
that
I'm
time
with you.
period.
Okay,
So
I'm
it
with
was
you.
sort of a
Yeah.
covert transformation, if you will.
Black
But
Ops, Black Ops of the Masons.
yeah, on a very deep level. But this is a question that I'm definitely unequipped, but also I think it deserves a better expert than I. To the best of my speculation, I think what they're trying to do, and whether this actually works or not, I don't know, is they're trying to take the spirit or the disembodied soul of that person and sort of anchor it in their auspices, right? So
Yeah.
if you take someone out of their grave, their body, it's disinterred, or maybe just their skull, and then they, you know, they have some sort of knowledge of how the afterlife works, and maybe they're like, okay, well, if we can get the skull in this place 9 years after the body dies, we know that that's when the soul's going to come back to look for the, you know, so that's when we trap them. Like, I don't know the
No,
metaphysics
that's
as to
fine.
why,
I don't
but
know
I think
either.
that's what it is. I think that's
Yeah.
what it is. And I know I'm not saying that for you. I'm just saying for the listener out there who might like be like, this bloody fool, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And it's like, well, yeah, I kind of don't, but to the best of my speculation, I think they're like trying to take a person's afterlife and alter it somehow, almost in the same way that the pharaohs would mummify themselves, and maybe that helped them, you know, come back and incarnate in this lifetime again, or however it works afterwards. I tend to think of reincarnation as a inevitability. But I don't know, you know, the mechanics or the physics of it.
No,
So
I mean, Mark, I don't know. I mean, and I'm not scared to ask a question that I don't know. And if my guest doesn't know, that doesn't matter either.
True.
Somebody's got to know. So if anyone out there knows, you know how to get hold of me or get hold of Mark. I mean, it's me being, I wonder why. I'd like to know. I do understand about the, I did touch, not research, but I read into it way back in the day. What was his name? That guy, he ran all the shows and he shouted all the time. Oh, for God's
Alex
sake.
Jones?
Yes, him. And it was back in the day, and I remember him shouting about it. He never spoke, he shouted. And I sort of got a gist of it, and I thought, well, and I couldn't balance it, because I had this awareness that for Native American Indians, that you know, it was that where the burials are being disturbed, you have to give it back. It's law, you know. And I couldn't understand. Well, what are you doing with that then? How come that I couldn't compute it? Because obviously, am I correct? First, in your country, they have a protection on their dead, basically, that no one can dig them up and take them off to do spells. So I'm thinking, well, how the hell could this happen?
Well, I think Geronimo died in captivity and was buried. Like, they captured him because Geronimo, he was so legendary because he never surrendered. He was one of the fiercest warriors, and he was so fierce that people actually, you know, when they jump into a pool or maybe they jump into some water, they'll say Geronimo, right? And that's because in the army, they told the paratroopers, the guys who would jump out of planes, they would tell them, you know, like, hey, if you're scared and you say Geronimo, you know, it's like a mantra, like a war mantra, because here's this fierce guy who had a magical, like Geronimo. Some of the stories, if people aren't aware, like, there are stories that like bullets would bounce off of him, like he was literally magic. Like, you couldn't kill him with a cannonball. But they captured him, and he died in I think he died in Oklahoma on a military base, quite possibly, which is the explanation why it would have been more accessible than, let's say, a, you know, reservation of people, which still, like, that is different. I think what that law you're describing, that refers to archaeological digs. You're not allowed to build on top of or move anything that has any archaeological significance, and that is to protect Native Americans. But really, unfortunately, there's not many Native Americans in the United States who even live on the land that they were present on when, you know, pre-Columbus time, we'll say. But, you know, people who are very interested in this subject, it's something that I'm deeply fascinated with, because, like I said, when I was interested as a kid in nature, I had a sort of bleeding heart liberal attitude about it, as people in America say, and that's been weaponized with the whole, you know, global warming thing. But really, at the core, I do see that our world is in need of us to connect with it. Whether or
Yeah.
not that means that
Yeah.
it's dying and we need to save it, I think that's a little too much of a fearful take on it. I think in
Yeah.
reality, the people who were in connection with the land that is now called the United States, Canada, and even Mexico and all of South America, those people have been displaced from their power source, from their ancestral connection. And because I was born here, I feel like I have a right or a duty to honor that in whatever way I can. And even though my skin color isn't the same as theirs, or even my DNA might not be exactly the same as theirs, or however we're going to separate us, the truth is we're all human beings. And I want to embody the message that those people had. And I think, you know, they're the original conspiracy theorists here in the United States, because, like, you know, that shirt that I had on with Sitting Bull, it also had the words don't it was sort of sarcasm. It was like, sure, you can trust the government, just ask an Indian, right? So you know, look at what's
exactly.
happening, right? So, and that's kind of the spirit that I've taken with me when I talk about animals in the environment, because even though, I think the planet's much stronger than we give credit, and we're not on the brink of disaster, it is a reality that animals are being mistreated. It is a reality that humans are being mistreated. And it is a reality that we are not living in right relationship with our natural world, and there should be harmony there.
I agree. I mean, it's, you know, it seems, I mean, this is just my truth, guys, is I don't think it's, I don't follow the truth of global warming. You know, the earth can look after itself. It's a live, conscious being. I think what's happening is, for maybe millions of years, who knows how long it was, there was a disconnect due to the programming, due to these, let's just use, I don't know what word to use. I don't even want to give them any credit, calling them secret societies, but there was a disconnect and a programming. And the time is happening now, and I've seen it, especially over the last 2 years, people waking up and reconnecting. So it's a reconnection to the earth. We're not separate to it. We actually grow on it. We're not higher of it. We're just, you know, the beings that are consciously, cognitively aware. And I can see this happening everywhere. The reconnect, and it's a port. I mean, I've spent it must be, I don't know, the last couple of years. It started very slow. Always loved the country, always loved things like that, but going into woods, going into forests, and getting pulled to go back, and ancient woods and ancient forests. And now I find myself going off and doing, it's a word I use, initiation. I take some people and connect them to the energy, let's say the energy, and I go in, and even every time I'm like, what the fuck? Oh my God, fuck, what? And I see what happens. And if you experience that connection, you think your family think you're crazy, you should have mine. If you can experience that connection, it's like a drug. It's like, and you see another go, boom, wake up. That is for me is enough. It keeps me going. So I totally resonate with where you're going, and your passion. And you know, I always say it's not saving the world. It's putting it back the way it should be.
Right. I think that's exactly how I should start to describe it, because that feels right. And I think, you know, it's very deep, and we want to play the blame game sometimes to kind of solve this like anxiety of why what's happening is happening. But I think, you know, as much as people come to shows like this for the questions and the answers, they also come for the solutions. And I don't think the solutions are always going to come from from the blame game, right? And we
Yeah.
can point the fingers and say, yeah, people colonized this place and it's their fault and all that. And then we start to sound like, you know, social justice warriors or something, you know. And it's interesting how that's been weaponized. And I think that's happening in a way to further divide us, because they know that in this age of Aquarius that we're on the brink of, if we're not already in it, you
We've
know,
done it. We've done it, Mark.
it's
I
gonna
tell Chris,
connect
it's
us
over.
all.
We've done it. They know
Right.
we've done it.
Right.
So, you know, I have this request, you know, I have an analogy. I said there's two famous chess players playing, and one chess player he's won, and the other one knows that there's about 7 moves left. Now they know the game's over, it's done and dusted. But said the bad boy chess player who's lost, he's going to try just keep dragging it out, because the audience are watching these two, you know, professional chess players going, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Oh my God, I hope we don't. And like this, but it's done, it's finished, it's over. And this is just like, you know, the scraggy ends of something. And for me, it's just, I come from my perspective. My truth is I'm on a different timeline to those on the fear-based timeline. I am not, it's not even in my, I'm not even phased. It's irrelevant to me. And you touched on something really important. How that happens is if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it's a non-judgmental, non-blaming another. Instead of blaming another, why don't you look at yourself? Look at you and say, well, why am I so angry about this? And do the work on that. That's a good way to start off on this. Because people say to me, well, you know, how do you connect to nature? And I've done this. It's like I love doing social experiments, and I did it on 2 of my children one day, and I took them out when they were younger, the youngest 2, and I stopped and I said, listen, and they went, I can't hear nothing, Mum. I said, listen. I said, Mom, I can't hear nothing. And I went, what about the birds? And they went, oh my God, I've never heard them before. They'd never even heard the bird. So distracted with, you know, I mean, like kids do. And it's things like that. And so I say to people, why don't you go walk in a wood? Not down in a busy road. Go in a wood, not even in a park where you've got dogs pooing and jumping all over you. Go in a wood, go in a forest, or go climb a hill. I can't climb a hill. But just go and just stop. Just stop. And my God, what a difference it makes. It's amazing.
Agreed. And you know, whether you're in, you know, the UK or you're in the US, there are ancient sites too that I would recommend people go to as well. And you know, maybe not Stonehenge anymore, but like the Avebury circles. I heard, you know, from a recent guest, Howdy Mikowski, who he studies megalithic sites and all sorts of interesting things about Tartaria and the World's Fairs. He mentioned that if Stonehenge has possibly been demagnetized, right? Whereas the Avebury circles or other lesser known sites are still more, you know, energetic. So yeah, I think places like that are really, you know, for me.
Sorry, I was going to say, on that Stonehenge, I had a conversation with someone that does researches all that, and it's all the military base surround it now. It's been demagnetized. It's literally it's dead. It's dead, and this is controlled. Right. However, there are other places that are not, and I wanted to say, at the Christmas holidays, I left this island and went to a little island. It was a spiritual journey. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm going on a show soon. They want me to share the experience. But I went off to a little island, and it was more of a quest thing coming in that I had to go. And I went to a megalithic stone, the Long Stone, and I was told to go there. All synchronistic events, you wouldn't believe, it's a long story. And my God, when I put my hand on that stone, I can't tell you what happened. Just being in that energy, everything changed. It started to change before I went there. I had a medium in America was drawing a picture, didn't know why. I was talking to her before she come on my show, and I said, I'm going to. She went, oh my God, they just said it's you. And look at that. She sent it. She has never seen it in her life. And she described it and where I was to put my hand, what was going to happen, and it was going to be life changing. And fuck me, I never dreamed in a million years the 4 days I had on that journey.
Wow.
Unbelievable. And I never knew it existed. And I got I call it downloads. You know, like you get a curiosity and it coming in, and and then synchronistically, the Isle of Wight would come up. That's a little island. The Isle of Wight. Someone's going to the Isle of Wight, and it went on like this. And I followed the synchronicity like breadcrumbs.
Mm-hmm.
Honest, how I got there, boom. And so I so resonate with that story.
I don't know how much time we have left, but I could share an example of that. So,
hey, I'm the boss. We can go into overtime. It's my show. Go on.
Right on. So, my girlfriend and I really, had an amazing 2021 summer, despite, everything being kind of different. Because we had this synchromistic mindset that hopefully people can understand a little bit better after the story. So a guest that I had on who is similar to you in some ways, which she's very connected with the astral realms and the intergalactic realms. I don't want to speak too much for her, but she's an artist and she's a medium. And she told us that there is a place not too far from us that has a energy vortex, and she used to live there. And that place I'm sure you'd have heard of before, because it was partly inspired by the Beatles and the mania that was the 60s, the Woodstock, part of New York where all the hippies supposedly had their big ruckus. Well, this isn't exactly where that concert took place, but the name Woodstock comes from this little artist town and sort of nestled in the mountains on the other side of the Hudson River from where I sit. And I'm in Connecticut again. So we took a little journey out there, and it was interesting, because Aurora had mentioned it. And I said, well, let's just drive out there. And Tara's up for an adventure anytime. She's great with that kind of stuff. So we just hit the road and we went down to Woodstock. And it's a little bit, I don't know what you guys would say in England to describe this, but it's very commercial, it's not as like true to its real nature anymore. It's kind of been, turned into somewhat of a mini mall type feel. But there was some interesting bookstores that we stopped in, and one of these bookstores had a book called Spirit in the Stone. And I had been kind of looking into that for whatever reason. I don't remember particularly what inspired it in the first place, but I wanted to find, megalithic sites here, because I know they're here. I just feel like they're, dismissed, like Gungewamp. I've been to Gungewamp, and people can look that one up. It's very interesting little site, and it was very hard to get to, and it's not very public. So I was just like, my suspicion is there's more of these megalithic sites here in New England. And this book, Spirit in the Stone, had everything that I had expected and more. And it taught us about this Hammonasset ley line, which, the word ley line comes from England, but in Asia, they call them dragon lines. Nikola Tesla called them, geographic telluric currents, so there's a science to these energy lines. And one of them kind of goes right through the state that I live in. And it's mentioned in the third chapter of this book. So as I'm flipping through the pages in this bookstore, I see this map of a ley line going through my state. And I'm like, whoa, we got to get this book, So I buy the book and I dig through it, and we just kind of spent the summer kind of trying our best to learn as much as we could about the Hammonasset ley line. And that book led to another book, which led to another book, which led to another book, which eventually taught me about these stone chambers that are all over New England. And we even have what's called an American Stonehenge. It's sort of a similar astronomical structure, and it's in New Hampshire. But yeah, there's so much that I've learned, even down to that the first governor of the state that I live in, before it was properly a state, was an alchemist by the name of John Winthrop Jr. And he was in, or John Winthrop the Younger, you know, the son of one of the very famous Massachusetts colonists, the Winthrop, and he was an alchemist, and he especially liked Connecticut because there's this type of mineral that we have here. It's pretty obvious in the soil because it's very shiny. It's mica. And, you know, at the time, they thought that maybe it was an indication that there was a lot of silver here in Connecticut, which turned out to not be as prosperous as they had hoped. But they found a lot of other interesting things, like a very rare mineral that kind of, you know, and this is so complicated, I won't want to get into it too much, but it sort of fits into how black powder gun, how they really like figured out a better way to process the black powder before it got put into a gun, which is why there were so many gun factories that then kind of flourished in this state. So many little angles that you could just find just through
fascinating.
Getting
it's
in the car and driving.
It's fascinating. I mean, in my recent experience prior, you know, this synchronistic, it was going there, and I had no idea about this long stone, this megalithic, no idea. And it was going on, and then synchronistically, because I check out shows, other people's shows, just to see what's going on. I went onto YouTube one day, and I said, oh, I wonder if there's anything about, I'm just so attracted to this Isle of Wight, you know, this island. I've been close. I've been down to the Portsmouth, all down there when I was a child. And then I couldn't believe it. There was a lecture going on by this author talking about the Isle of Wight. And, you know, using all these large, extensively long academic words. And I got through that, you know, I put it together what she was saying. And then she started to share the history of this place that I wanted to go. And through that, I then found out synchronistically, I have family connections and ancestor from that exact place. It went like that, like you know how it leads you. And it was so fascinating. And to the point now, I'm going to move there. I'm going to live there. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it will happen. And my heart's there. That's how far this has gone. Wow. I have to move to that energy. I have to be in it. Yeah.
I love that. And that's partly what inspired a lot of Tara and I's journeys this year, because as things got so shook up, you know, we realized that the state that we're in is probably not the best for the position that we're in. So we might have to move, and that means just kind of going on little roadies, as you put it. I love that term.
Go off grid.
Well, and we want to go off grid, but that's, you know, that takes a lot of money. But, you know, at least just like getting a sense of an area by exploring and being, you know, just having our wits about us, and maybe keeping our senses keen for that sort of energy that you picked up on there. And I'm happy to hear that. I'm maybe excited to see what happens next.
I mean, I'm excited to see, I mean, you know, and so how are you going to do it? I said, I don't do anything. It will just happen. Just getting there, there was no ways or means to get there, and everything fell into place, Mark. Everything fell into place. I did nothing, and everything's fallen into place again. All the pieces are already in place now. All we're waiting for is me just to move. That's all. And I go with the flow. I go with the flow. I don't, put a time, a distance, or analyze whatever. I just let it go. There's no time. So because I've definitely experienced that, and then when I was over there on the island, everyone was going to. I mean, I was welcomed like I was an islander. You're an islander now, and I said, but I haven't got it. No, we can tell by you. And they're going, well, you can do your shows from the island. I went, yes, but it was like going home. I can't even explain it. And I woke up every morning, walked the beach, and watched the sun come up.
Wow.
Yeah, every morning. And I'd never dreamed I would ever experience it. It wasn't even in my head to experience it. And and watch the sun rise. You're on a little tiny island. And they said to me, when did you know that you were going to move? I said, when I was on the ferry leaving the mainland and I spotted this island, my heart went, that's it. That's when I made the decision. Before I put my foot on it, it was that powerful. So wow. This is why I say, it goes with follow your passion. And it is alchemy. It is magic. If you say something, like people think the law of attraction is, I want this and that. No, the law of attraction is energy. When you put something out with passion and you hold it like you've already got it, you're in it, that you can't unlove it, it appears. And there is no long distance. It just appears. And you don't even realize, when you look back, you think, well, there wasn't any time between the first, I want to go there, and I'm there, it's gone. And that's, for me, how it works. And I can't wait. So you need to go on some journeys, and then I can bring you back on the show, and you can talk about them and all the things that go on. I think it's wonderful what you're doing.
Thank you. And I want to have you on my show to talk about all that. Obviously, this other show got dibs, and I'm sure folks will find it there. But my audience, who might not be familiar with you, would, I'm sure, love to hear it. Maybe we can plan that for next month or so, or maybe even when you're broadcasting live from this new studio there. I'm excited.
Oh, I'm excited. It could be in the forest. I don't know. We went on so many adventures. Non-stop, 24/7 in woods. It was daily. It was just amazing. So yes, I'd love to come on your show. I'd love to. But before we end this conversation, it's just been fantastic, and I knew it would, talking to you. Let the audience know, where can they find you? Sell yourself. Chris Matthews says, sell yourself, whore yourself out. That's what he says to me. Go ahead. Whore yourself out. So you can whore yourself out, Mark.
Well, for folks who like what they've heard so far, I have a website, myfamilythinksimcrazy.com. And if you want to help me keep the lights on and keep this podcast going, we have a Patreon where we put bonus content, and we're also on Rockfin as well. And you can find all of the links on linktr.ee/mftic, Linktree, right? And yeah, I got so many little side shows. The one I do with Mike is on pause until Mike comes back. I haven't heard from him. I don't know what's gonna happen. Like I said, listeners, tune into his YouTube channel to get all the details and our podcast. But yeah, I don't know. And then my show's been rocking and rolling. I just had Chris Knowles on, and he's always a great guest. It's his second time on the show. I had a very interesting conversation that's coming out this Monday with author and alchemist Brian Cote Noir, who I would recommend you get on your show as well. He's a very
Send me the link when it's
I
come.
will.
Send me the link.
I
Send me the
will.
link because
So a
I'd
lot's
love
been
that.
going on.
Brilliant. Well, I thank you so much. I really do. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and you've definitely
Been a
got to come
pleasure.
back. There's no doubt about that.
Thank
And now
you.
I'm going to haul myself out now. So, guys, thank you for watching the show. Tomorrow night, Saturday, I have my live. It's still the pilot series, a new podcast. Excuse me. Called Waking the Dead Ghost Stories. We had case number 1 last week. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. UK time, is case number 2. And it's called The Accidental Medium. So you can get your coffee, your tea, or your wine, sit back in the chair if you're in the UK, because it'll be nighttime, and listen to my guest, Lindsay, who's going to come on and share her paranormal experience, which did lead to her becoming a medium. That's why it's so fascinating for me. So until the next time, thank you for watching, and see you when I have another conversation. Bye for now. It doesn't want to end. It wants to keep you on here, Mark.